Okay, are we getting, do we have, is our whole board on and everybody from staff on?
Looks that way.
All right, well, it's 5 o'clock, so I think we'll get started. Actually, it's 5:01. So we'll get started. I'll call the meeting to order. I'll read the statement on remote participation pursuant to Section 7E of Open Meetings Act on agenda pursuant to Section 7E of the Open Meetings Act. I, as president of the McHenry County Conservation District, have determined that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent at this time because of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic and Governor Pritzker's related disaster declaration. I have further determined that the physical presence of an employee or member of the public body at the regular meeting location is not feasible due to the disaster described in the governor's declaration. So with that, I'll call the meeting to order and I'll ask for the first roll call.
Trustee Dom?
Here.
Trustee Campbell?
Here.
Trustee Cook?
Yes.
Trustee Fritz?
Here.
Trustee Brandt?
Here.
Trustee Thomas?
Here.
And Trustee Henning?
Here. All present. Thank you. With that, we're opening it up to public comment 1. And do we have another one on here?
We do not, just one this evening.
Well, due to the fact that I see we have a few visitors, and if they'd like to comment now, that'd be great. If they have anything later, everybody remind me when we get to the end that we'll open up again. Even though we don't have it on the agenda, if that's all right with everyone, I just soon hear from anybody that has a comment.
That's fine with me.
I know it's not on the agenda, but I don't want to sign off and be done and not hear what anybody has to say. So with that, we'll go forward. And is there any comments?
I have one.
Okay, thank you. Is it Stephen Greeley? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Go right ahead.
Okay. So I am the chair of the McHenry County Historic Preservation Commission. And I saw your agenda, and Mr. Pagalka was nice enough to share that with me. And I just wanted to bring some facts to your attention related to these properties as it pertains to the Fox Bluff buildings. In 2013, the Conservation Board passed a resolution declaring that these properties that weren't torn down were suitable for public use and access. They were great examples of that Camp Algonquin. And then as far as the Weidrich barn, I think I've seen 2 that were referenced as Weidrich. One is the brown barn that they do programs in, and then there's a blue barn. But either way, I think those are good examples of historic resources. The Powers Walker House is one of our county landmarks as designated by the county board. And then the McConnell property, the Kennedy Way Station, those were designated by our surveyors. We do a rural survey of all properties in the county. And in 2002 and 2003, our surveyors determined that the McConnell Farmstead would be an appropriate landmark, and that in 2014 and 2015, our surveyor determined that the Kennedy Way Station building would also be suitable for historic landmarking, and that one's also eligible for the National Register. And then we did have our surveyors look at the Pigeon Farmstead back in '98. And those were designated as some homes and buildings that were of some historical significance. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention as far as the decisions you'll make related to those properties. Thank you.
Can I ask you a question? So when your surveyors go and make these designations, what's the criteria that's used?
The national landmarking process to be on the National Register, you're looking at properties that have historic significance, and there's a variety of factors. They're mainly looking at, is there something of historical nature? Is there architect or people associated with the property that are historic, and that kind of thing.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else with a comment?
My name is Grace Moline, and I'm with the McHenry County Historical Society, and I'm chairperson of the Historic Sites Committee. And I'm here just an observation. I wanted to know what was going on with these properties because historic preservation is one of my passions, and I'm curious as what will happen to these buildings.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Okay,
John,
then
could I ask a question?
certainly.
I'm not familiar with the Historical Society. Is it a private foundation? Is it a government organized in some way? And so that would, if someone could just enlighten me about that.
Okay, the McHenry County Historical Society is a non-governmental organization. It is private. It is a not-for-profit. And we have a number of interests in educating the public about history. We have a museum. We are in Union, Illinois. Kurt Bagalka is the administrator, and he is here today too. And we do have a historic preservation program. Our program, though, is not it's an honorary program where we do bestow plaques on sites that are worthy of historical and or architectural significance.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
This is Kurt Pigalka. I'd just like an opportunity to listen to what you have to say, and I appreciate the fact that I could comment afterwards. So if you have any other questions about the Historical Society, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Hand up for anyone else?
I don't see anything else.
Okay, then we'll move along. And Elizabeth, you're up next on the agenda.
Terrific, thank you. And I'm going to, tonight, we've got several properties, and I appreciate that the Board of Trustees have gone out to visit all of these areas. About the COVID pandemic, we haven't been able to get everybody together for a group tour, but you individually toured these properties. Director of Operations and Public Safety, John Kramer, has prepared a presentation and a report this evening that will take you through each of the different properties. I guess our goal this evening is to discuss these, understand what is necessary to stabilize them, and to have a conversation. And so we can get some direction on what you would like to see us priority-wise going forward. So John, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. I will share my screen. Can everybody see that?
Yepper.
Yep. Thank you. Yep.
Okay. Thank you, board members, for the opportunity to go through this. The district has been at historic structure preservation for a lot of years. I'm going to kind of cover a little bit about that. A lot of people have assisted with this report, putting it together. Chris Yanko, Facilities Maintenance Manager, helped. Elizabeth Kessler helped put some guidance in on that. Amy Peters, the Planning Manager, helped, gave me a lot of guidance on how to do this. And then Megan Lee helped put a lot of the finishing touches on it. So there were a lot of people who had their hands in this. It's a very large undertaking because the district has been at this historic preservation for a very long time, 30 to 35 years. And try to summarize that into, you know, a 30-minute presentation is sometimes difficult, but I really focused this report on stabilization. And that's really the crux of what the report's about. So I'm going to get right into really the purpose and intent. This report is an overview of about 27 structures that have been saved for lack of a better word, for the history of these structures. And then also they're held for a future use. Some have been in various stages of renovation. Some are being used and, you know, educational programming going in them right now. and a lot of them are vacant. The report is going to go over the condition, the use, proposed use or existing use, and also some probable costs to stabilize these. The whole intent here is to provide the Board of Trustees with with some guidance on funding decisions. We've had, as you know, less resources available, and so we're trying to give the board some information about these structures so that they can make informed decisions in the future here. The final point that I want to make is the perspective, again, is to stabilize these for 5 years. That's really the perspective that this report is coming from. And I reiterate that because there's lots of different perspectives that this could come from. And this one is coming from basically, we want to stabilize the structures we can stabilize so that we can make a future decision on them. Because if we don't stabilize them, then they might not be there. They're in the future. So I guess I want to get into what determines a historic status. I think one of the first things that would determine it, or that would make a structure make this list, is that if it is indeed has a landmark plaque, and a couple of them do, they're pretty much automatic. If they have that, that means that a third party that has a lot more knowledge about history than I do has determined that they are significant from a historical perspective. A second factor that allowed them to make this list would be that they had enough sufficient remaining history about them or historic integrity left that they could, they still hold merit in terms of a historic structure. An example of one that does not is, it would be like Brookdale. There are components of Brookdale that are very old, but it has been remodeled over the years before the district was ever involved many, many times. So therefore the historical integrity is gone. You really can't, you can see little bits of it, but you got to look hard for it. A third qualifier would be as if they're incorporated into a master plan. McConnell Farmstead is an example of that. The Fox Bluff, Camp Algonquin buildings are an example of that. That was mentioned before by Mr. Greeley. So that is a qualifier. Another one has the potential to be programmed. An example of we had a small building that was an outlier. It was a milk house that was stone, and it was isolated. It was, the only thing out there. There really isn't any programming opportunity for it. So that's something that didn't or does not make this list. And I guess this is just something to bring the board up to speed on, and that is most of these structures at some point in time have been discussed and the historical significance discussed in a decision made on these structures, that they be incorporated into a planning process, they be renovated or something like that. There are a couple of exceptions to that. One is the Kennedy Way Station. I don't remember that one ever really coming up and having a conversation about preserving it for the historical integrity. It's always been discussed that it has a plaque and things like that, but I can't remember that one coming up. It is possible that it did. I didn't do an exhaustive search of the minutes to see if that was the case, but that's one that hasn't been, as far as I know, a decision or discussion made on. And then the other one is the Peach Farmstead. Yes, that has been discussed. It was discussed at length a few years ago, and we were kind of looking at a special use going on that particular farmstead. But in terms of identifying it as a historic campus and preserving it as such has not been discussed. So those two are the exceptions. I do want the board to know we have a long tradition of restoring, repurposing, reusing structures, older structures, historic structures for uses. The example would be Weedrick Barn. It's gone through a couple of renovations in the 80s and then again in the 90s. it was used for a very, very long time as an education center. In the 1990s, the district embarked on the Powers Walker House renovations. That was done mostly by volunteers. The district pitched in and put a roof on the house and a few other things, but it was mostly done by volunteers, and that's been a good partnership for a lot of years, and now is actually being programmed. In 2000, Brookdale was renovated. We tried to keep as many of the historical components as possible while also utilizing it as an administration center, and actually took on the name of the historic village that was once there. And then in the 2000s, we embarked on the McConnell restoration project with a master plan, and then with a lot of volunteer hours as well. So the district does have quite a bit of success in doing it, and tradition in doing it. Whenever you get into a situation like this, you want to make sure that you have the authority to do it. And in this case, you look at what does the Conservation District Act state? And the Act clearly allows for the purchase, restoration, rehabilitation of historic structures. In the report, I did a search of the statute of the Conservation District Act and found all the references to history or culture in there, and it does pinpoint that, yeah, this indeed is something that is allowed. In addition to that, looked at the administrative guideline ordinance 03-413. This was written in 2003, and this is at a time when the Conservation District was buying a lot of land that had a lot of buildings on them. And to kind of get our hands around it, we identified that we needed to define conditions of buildings. So we put definitions together so that we could clearly say, okay, this building has this, this, and this going on, so therefore it fits this category. And then the second interesting thing that is in that administrative guideline is it does require that before the district put a building on a demolish or demolition list, that it does go through some type of evaluative process for historical significance. And that is it's not a veto. They can't stop it. But really, again, we want to make sure that the board and the district has all the information about something before we make a decision like that. Because once you make a decision to demolish something, it's done, it's over with. So moving on to the different campuses, I'm just briefly going to cover these, and then I'll go into in depth on each one of them a little bit more. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about all the history about them and things like that. That is very well documented. And I incorporated a lot of that into the written report that we have. So, all of that information is referenced. I'll gloss over some of the history of them, but not get into the in-depth. Plus, as I get into more the in-depth information of it, it generates the opportunity to make a mistake and say something, crossover. One is this age, one is that age. So I have all of that stuff written. The first campus is Fox Bluff. That's the Camp Algonquin facilities, the three remaining structures there. Then I wrapped Glacial Park together. Weedick Barn, Powers Walker House, and the Powers Walker Barn are all very close to one another in proximity, so they kind of function as a campus. And then that's the McConnell Farmstead. That is all one set of buildings up there. And then the Kennedy Way Station is at Brookdale, and that's a single building, but it is a standalone there. One that is not designated, I already mentioned, is the Peachin Farmstead. Really hasn't been designated, but it is. It does have some historical buildings, older buildings on it, so it is being discussed tonight as part of this presentation. A little bit more about Fox Bluff, former Camp Algonquin. Camp Algonquin operated as an open air camp for about 100 years, or I think a little over 100 years. The Conservation District purchased it. I believe at the time that we purchased it, it had 60 to 70 buildings on it. Some of them were being used, some of them were not being used. But we did lease that to I think it was the McHenry County it was Metropolitan Family Services first, and then it was the YMCA of McHenry County. So they did operate, they continued to operate it while the district owned it for a number of years, a handful of years, and then eventually stopped operating that. And then the district inherited all of those buildings and things like that. The three structures that remain on the site, we have removed all but these three structures, because these were the three structures that were, and there actually was a fourth structure that actually nature took down, unfortunately. A tree fell on it, and that took it down. But these three structures remain as kind of a signature of what the camp was like at one point in time. The rec hall is in the upper right corner there. That one does have a good roof on it. It does need paint and the envelope sealed on it. And the condition of that one is stable. The barn and dorm, the Wilbrandt barn, is a lower right, and the Tribune dormitory is in the lower left. They need roofs, paint, and sealing of the envelope. They need all of those things. Their condition is poor. The reports that we got from Midwest Archaeological Survey has identified that the Wilbrandt barn is actually the oldest structure on the campus. It was actually renovated for camp use. The upper level is renovated for camp use, but it is an old dairy barn, and you can still see that as in the basement there. I should say the main level has the old dairy gutters and things like that in it. Moving on to Glacial Park, this is Weidrich Barn, part of the original Glacial Park purchase. It was restored in both the 80s and the 90s for offices, meeting space. In fact, it functioned as the visitor center or education center of Glacial Park until Lost Valley Visitor Center came online. It does need some ADA renovations. It is currently vacant. The condition is stable because it has a good roof. It just needs normal maintenance. And you can see in the picture there that it actually is receiving a coat of paint there, which happened this summer. So that one is stable. Moving on to the additional buildings in Glacial Park, you've got the Powers Walker House and Barn, an 1850s house and barn. Educational programming does go on in the house. A lot of volunteer hours have gone into it, almost 25,000 hours to renovate that and restore that house. They have done the lion's share of that work. District has filled in here and there, but the lion's share of it was done by volunteers. The house is indeed landmark plaqued, as was mentioned before. And the house is in excellent condition, and the barn is in fair condition. But you noticed about that barn in the lower left, it has a steel roof and steel siding. The only thing it really doesn't have are windows. And so that thing's gonna be there a long time as long as that steel stays in place. Moving on to the McConnell Farmstead. This is part of the North Branch Conservation Area. It was master planned in the mid-2000s. And the intent was to restore the facilities and develop some of them for education. 3 structures are in good to stable condition. 5 of the structures are poor. The T-barn, which is the lower left there, this is scheduled for roof replacement. To state it more accurately, 2 years ago, we had budgeted to replace the roof. That was intended to be done in 2019. But because we learned in the spring of 2019 that Prairie View Education Center, which is a building in the Crystal Lake area, needed some significant resources put into it to seal its envelope. And that is a facility that is actively being used by summer camps and school programs and whatnot. We decided to hold off on putting the roof on there in 2019, held that money, and then went ahead and applied that to the Prairie View Education Center this year and did those improvements this year. The barn roof, it is in a situation where it's deteriorated significantly, so therefore it was reproposed for the 2022 budget. Continuing with the McConnell Farmstead, there was a small active volunteer group there that has been active for about 16 years. They've been focusing on the house and the small outbuildings because, quite honestly, the barns are just too large for volunteers to handle. That being said, the volunteers have done a great deal of cleanup inside those barns, removed the hay and the manure and other things that are there, the junk. So that they did do what they could do on those barns, but swinging hammers at those barns and putting roofs on is not something that volunteers can do. Moving on to Brookdale's Kennedy Way Station, an 1850s Greek Revival house, a very prominent looking house. It's right on 14. Most of you have seen it, I would assume. It does indeed contain a landmark plaque by the McHenry County Historical Society. There are no plans, master plans or site plans done for this facility. And it has significant envelope issues, all of them, including roof. It needs window issue or has window issues and needs tuck pointing. It is in poor condition. The Hollows Peachin Farmstead,
Can I interrupt you?
Yes, please.
On your inventory of historic structures, attachment F, for the Kennedy Way Station, there is nothing marked about foundation. Do you know the status of the foundation? Is it good, bad?
If we knew it had issues, we marked it.
Yes.
If we didn't know we didn't guess.
Gotcha.
One of the things that you can pretty much assume is that any large structure probably has foundation issues. But if we couldn't see it, we didn't note it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Peachin. This is the one, like the Kennedy, has not undergone any sort of planning process. It was purchased in 2006, and at the time, the owner, Harry Peachin, was the third generation Peachin to have lived there. In fact, he was born in the house that you see in the upper right corner there. And the board thought it was very important to capture the history since he was still alive. And so we spent some time with him. It was to capture as much of the history of the family and the farm that he could remember and generate. And the guy was sharp as a tack. So we were able to get a lot of information from him, as in the report you saw a kind of it isn't a narrative, it's actually just kind of a dump of all the information that he gave us. There are 12 structures there, and none of them are stabilized. The dairy barn, which is in the lower right there, does have a newer roof on that was put on about 10 years ago, I think. My assessment is that several of them are not salvageable. I think if anybody walked out there, they would have that same assessment of some of these. These things needed repairs starting 10 to 15 years ago that were not done. And therefore, I think some of them have gotten to a point where they're unrecoverable, not salvageable. I want to talk for a minute about landmark plaque. There are representatives from both entities, local entities, that do that in McHenry County. There are many different levels. It does go to state and national. And Mr. Greeley was referencing that when he was talking a minute ago. And each of them is I think John had asked a question about qualified. They all have qualifiers that go into it. I don't know them in and out, but they have, it has a very restrictive set of protocols that go into place to make sure that not just anything gets plaqued, but something that is actually qualified. I don't know whether the state and national require an owner to apply, but I certainly know that on the local level, that is, the owner has to petition to have it accepted as a plaqued structure. There are restrictions that come with it that can be done to the modifications, specifically to the outside of the structure. They seem to be a little more fluid about the things on the inside, but they don't want the outside facade changing. As an example, if you look in the lower right corner, you see the Powers Walker house, and you can see the windows are 6 panes of glass over 6 panes of glass. The 6 over 6 like that if we were to change out those windows, we would have to go back with 6/6 windows in those. So that's the kind of things that people would pay attention to. And of course, there are some compliance issues that go along with it, more so with the Historic Preservation Commission, because that actually can get into the regulatory side of things with the County Planning and Development Department if we were not following the regulations that are put forth there. Moving on to plans, reports, and studies. Over the years and over the 35 years that we've been doing this, there are a ton of plans and reports and archaeological studies that have been done around and on all of these facilities. And it's a kind of a testament to the district's dedication to try to preserve history. We have these reports, we have them out there, but I do want to underscore something, that they are documents in time, meaning that they were made with the intentions and the ideas and the concepts and the opinions and the known resources at those times. Well, all of the vision of those still remain relevant. I'll give you an example. Those buildings at Fox Bluff, there's a demand for event space and public space like that. There's no doubt that they would be used. The thing that has changed, so the vision remains relevant. The thing that has changed is the economic situation. This district has less resources available and more demands on its capital dollars than ever before. I'm not telling you folks anything you don't know. You know this about that. And so that economic situation has changed and causes us to have to take a look at those plans and go, I wonder if we can continue with that. I'm going to move on to grants for just a second. About 5 years ago, I realized that we were not going to have the resources that we needed to fully do what I wanted to do or what the district wanted done at the McConnell Farmstead. And so I started exploring grants. I actually assigned a staff member to go through and explore grants. And they did a lot of research, and they created a binder that was about this thick, 2.5 inches thick, of just a myriad of grants. There is a lot of grants out there for these kinds of things, for historic preservation, for historic programming, for planning, and just for renovating structures for people to use. There are a lot of things out there. As we studied that big binder and went through it, we realized that there were 4 main things that kind of came to the surface. First of all, those dollars go to projects that have the most broad appeal. So if they would qualify for a state list or a national registry, they would go higher on the list. And I didn't think that McConnell probably qualified for that. So that was kind of a strike against the idea. We continued to move through there. The other thing is that it must be maintained. And that makes sense. Who would want to invest in something that's going to be gone or not be maintained in 5 or 10 years? Generally, one of the requirements they put forth was to require that it get a landmark status. And the idea behind that is that you would then have a third party, a local third party, keeping an eye on the structure to make sure that the entity that received the money was doing what it was intended to do with that money. So that was a bit of a problem for me, because I'm like, okay, this requires maintenance at a time when I know that our maintenance dollars are thinner and thinner. And so it was like, okay, that could be a problem as well. The third item is the grants were small. In general, there were some big ones out there. Don't get me wrong, there's a few big ones out there, but for the most part, it was for programming and planning, and they were fairly small. And at McConnell, we needed money for bricks and mortar, for repairs and replacements, for roofs and things like that. So it really didn't apply to the McConnell situation. And lastly, there was an expectation that it was either currently being publicly programmed or would be immediately upon the finishing or completion of that. And I knew that we didn't have those operating dollars or plans in place for that either. So I actually abandoned the idea of using grants in that capacity because I felt we would, if we were receiving grants on it, we would be promising things we couldn't deliver on. And I didn't want to get the district in that situation. Moving on to attachment F. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because there is a boatload of information on it. Instead, I want to give you the lay of the land of this and figure that at some point in time during the discussions later that we will come back to these documents. So I want to start out and I want to get my cursor up here. Can you all see that on the screen?
Yipper.
Okay. In the very left side of this are in the lighter color are the campuses. There's Glacial Park, North Branch, and Fox Bluff. The rest of them continue on to page 2. We'll get to that page in a minute. On the very left side is the structures within that campus. And then when you start to get into this area of the document here, you start to see what are the conditions, the situation. Is it being used? How big is it? What are the plans that might be in place for it? So that's where that information is. And then as you start to move to this side of the page, you start getting into what is the condition and what are the maintenance items that are identified in here. Now, from a very, very high lens look at this, when you want it, very simply, the more orange X's on the right side of this, the more money and resources and time needed to stabilize that structure. So let's use, for example, the Fox Bluff buildings here. The district has been put a lot of resources into Fox Bluff in the last few years. It was in building demo, a lot of building demo resources. That's where a lot of money went, okay? But we have not put resources into stabilizing these structures. So you see a lot of orange X's over here. By contrast, Glacial Park, you have Wiedrich Barn and the 2 Powers Walker buildings. And over the last 20 years, the district has put resources into these, and you see very few orange X's over here. Moving down to McConnell. A minute ago, I talked about the volunteers focusing on these smaller structures here. And that's these first 3. And if you notice that you have a lot of gray and not as many X's and orange X's there. One anomaly here is this yellow square. The district has the product for the roof. We have the shingles. We just haven't gotten those put on yet. So we do have part of that one in terms of a stable roof on it. As you move on down to the larger structures on McConnell, you start seeing a lot more color show up over here. Start seeing the orange. I'm going to move on to page 2. And here we have McConnell continued, and these are the large barns at McConnell, and you see a great deal of that over here. Again, these are structures that were beyond the staff's, or I'm sorry, the volunteers' ability to go on to. Kennedy Way Station, a lot of color here. And then the hollows, we've spent very few resources on, and you see quite a checkerboard of orange X's over here. Is there any questions about how this lays out right now?
Nope. A lot of work, John. Thank you.
All right, now I'm going to move on to how we came up with a lot of the costs, the estimated costs to do the structure stabilization. And again, I focus on this for 5 years, okay, because it's just a nice round number to go to. And I want to identify that these estimated costs are different than verified costs. A verified cost is a project that we know we have budgeted for. We know we're going to be doing it within the next few months, it is a result of contractors bidding or quoting on. I'm going to give you an example of the difference between an estimated cost and a verified cost. We have a real world example of it in Prairie View Education Center. In September of 2019, Chris Zianko, facilities maintenance manager, went out and got cost estimates to paint and to put a roof on that, to seal the envelope of the Prairie View Education Center. He got that from contractors. It came back at $112,000. We budgeted $115,000 in the current fiscal year budget, and so that happened in September. 6 months later, we go out to bid on this, and the contractors realize that this is a real project and we're moving forward with it. And the bids come back, and the lowest bid was $72,500 for that project. So that was a verified cost. And just 6 months earlier, we had the $112,000 projected cost given to us. So that's the difference between our costs. Now these are all based in science. You know, some of them are current updated contractor estimates. Some of them have been past contractor estimates that we've adjusted for inflation. And some of them are known costs for similar projects. Brookdale, we had some tuck pointing done at Brookdale. We know that it's about the same scope as what would need to happen at the Kennedy Way Station. So we were able to extrapolate those numbers. So that's where the estimated costs come from. The next several sheets we have kind of gives you a snapshot of how we derived where the numbers were allocated to. You can see paint and seal the envelope. You can see roof repairs and foundation issues if we knew what those were. If we didn't know there was any cost to it, we put zeros by it. Weidrich Barn in this area here has a good foundation. We know that that's a zero cost. If we had known costs, we would let you know, but if we don't, we don't. But we know that they're out there. I mean, these are potential costs down the road. There are several pages. That's Fox Bluff, Glacial Park. Then we move into McConnell right there. Those are the McConnell buildings. And then you move into Kennedy Way Station, the first half of the Peachin buildings, and then the second half of the Peachin buildings. And down in the lower right corner, down here, is the total probable estimated cost to stabilize all 27 structures, a little over $500,000 there. So that's that's where and how we got that. Now, all of these numbers in this right column here got transferred back to what was known as attachment G. So, but this gives you an idea of where we and how we got those numbers. Finally, I'm going to get into some of the conclusions. And Elizabeth was instrumental in helping guide it to this, because I was, we didn't just want to deliver all this information and say, okay, now what? Okay, board, make a decision. We thought we'd leave you with some thoughts, some ideas on how to get your hands around this a little bit. First of all, we need to recognize that the circumstances have changed. And these decisions were made at a time, the decisions to keep these buildings, buy these buildings, were made at a time when resources for the Conservation District were expanding and greatly in some cases. Those bond referendums passed. We had a lot of resources available for capital improvements. There were a lot of grants available coming back in for capital improvements at that time. And we're not in that time anymore. So affording the preservation of these 27 structures will require the changes in priorities to both operating dollars and capital dollars. It's just a reality of it. And so this is the real question of it right here. If the district wants to continue in historic preservation, and that's the question. If the district wants to continue in historic preservation, that's the first thing you guys have to decide. If we want to, then what we suggest is we focus on the structures that have the best chance of surviving and being there with only a minimal investment. And that is the 6 structures that are stable, good, or excellent. And the common denominator there is they all have good roofs on them. That seems to be a critical thing. It is a critical thing. If you can keep the water from coming down inside, you can hold on to a building for a long time. The 6 are listed there. It's Fox Bluff Recreation Hall. It's Powers Walker House. It's the Weedrick Barn. It's the McConnell House, the McConnell Chicken Coop, and the McConnell Granary. And again, they all have good roofs on them. And so that's really, if you want to stay in this business of historic preservation, it's really try to focus on those things.
John, I have
Finally,
the granary does not have the roof on it yet, correct? We just own the shingles. I saw them when I went through the barn at McConnell.
That is correct. Yes, that is correct.
So it's listed as being done, but it's not really done yet. It needs some labor there. Yes,
and if our staff has the time to do it, it will be, it would be $1,000. It won't cost $1,000 to do it. It's just their labor. If we use a contractor, it'll probably be $3,000 to $4,000 to do. A couple more conclusions, and this one hurts a bit, and that is that we need to start the process of putting the the Peachin buildings, Peachin Farmstead on the demo list. That they have deteriorated to a point where many of them, I believe, are unsalvageable. So I believe that we need to start that process. And once we put them on there, we can make a determination on whether we can do some of them in-house. I'm sure we can probably rent some equipment to do that, and we should be able to do some of them in-house. But some of them, I believe, will have to be done by a contractor as well, which is more costly, but it's just what it is. They're beyond our ability to take down, our staff's ability. The second thing is, or another thing is, to remain open to non-typical partnerships, unique partnerships. We had a couple of them come our direction. Neither one of them happened to work out the way we had hoped, but we gave them a good shot. I think there might be another opportunity. I could see someone coming saying, hey, I've always thought, that Kennedy Way Station would be a great X, Y, or Z. Would the district entertain having a conversation with us about it? And I think we need to encourage, that we do entertain those kinds of things and keep those options open for us. And then last recommendation is reevaluate in 5 years. These buildings, we don't know what circumstance may change in 5 years. Something may change, and that may allow us then to reevaluate and reassess and move forward in a different direction. So that's the report in a nutshell. Now I figured I'd turn it back to President Henning to entertain discussions. I certainly will answer questions while you folks, if you have them. I can go back up into the PowerPoint and we can settle in on some of the different slides. So I'll leave it to you, President Henning, to take it from here.
President Henning, can I make a comment? Just one more thing, and before you guys go into discussion, please. And John, thank you. You did a wonderful job in going through all of the historical sites and areas that we have. I did want to just mention one other thing too to the board, just so you're aware of some efforts that we did, not only to work towards trying to find some additional funding outside of grants for these historic structures. In 2014, we worked with their legislators to have 2 bills introduced in Springfield. One of them was to unstack our bonding with our non-referendum authority specifically, which we were successful on. At the same time, we had another bill, which was Senate Bill 3342. And this bill was to create an additional levy for endangered, threatened, and protected species, and also historic preservation. Due to 2 bills being introduced simultaneously with the same sponsors and co-sponsors on both sides, we ended up foregoing the Senate Bill 3342 because it was getting complicated in the Illinois General Assembly to try to push two bills. While that was going on, Landmarks Illinois also recognized the Fox Bluff Conservation Area and placed it on one of the 10 most endangered historic places for 2014. And so that was identified as well as we were working through. And then lastly, where things are today, you know, that legislation, we haven't done anything with it. We, of course, haven't taken our levy for quite a long time. So the thought of an additional levy for this specific purpose, but I throw that out there because we were making tractions. We did have legislators at the time where that bill was introduced.
Okay, thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, John, for everybody and your staff for all the effort that's gone into this and for the presentation. Well done. A lot of information there for all of us to lead to more discussions. And with that, I will open it up for discussions for, I guess I'll begin with any of the trustees that have any comments or questions going forward to this as we consider these properties, as we go through our budget processes for the next year or two or three, or however long that continues. So I'll open that up for discussion right now. Any trustees want to come forth with a comment?
I always try to let someone answer first. I didn't hear anything, so I'll go. But just for those who are listening, I just want to give a brief review is that we've had a hard time taking our levy. We've been kept from taking our levy, and over the past, 10, 11 years, we have given up $6.5 million. We were not allowed to take $6.5 million in levies. So the problem is that now we're down to the end. But with that said, I do believe we need to continue with preservation. I agree. I did my own evaluation, as hard as it is. But I do have a couple of buildings that, besides what John recommended, and the one is the T-barn at McConnell. I was in a round barn that before it fell down on River Road in Marengo. I was in the Square Barn. That Square Barn Road in Algonquin was named after before the developer bulldozed it with a sneaky little deal. And I don't think I've ever seen or been in a T-barn. And I just can't be part of something where I lose something that I know is unique and important. So I have added that to the list. And I added another one to the list, the Power Walker House Barn. I've heard John mention that. I've been on the board quite a while. And as long as that aluminum's on there, then that barn's in good shape. And I would say that we keep an eye on it and keep it on the list. And lastly, this is a long time ago. Tom McCarthy took me down to Fox Bluff, and I walked in the recreation hall, and I looked up and I saw a spectacular view of that roof. So I'm glad that we're keeping that. But I would be in favor of, even though it's a lot of money, maintaining Tribune Dormitory number 2. So I do have a soft spot for this. But in the same kind, I walked pitching, and even though it said no trespassing, I figured out as a trustee I could do it. I saw nothing that I would fight to save. So nothing on that farm I would fight to save. So that's my comments.
Okay, thank you, Dave, for your time put in on that and for your comments. Well taken. Yeah, they're interesting buildings to go through, and every barn that's out there, farmers never seem to have come to an agreement on what the best design was, because there's no two barns alike. They're all unique in some way. So that does, the uniqueness part of it is, I guess it lends itself to every structure there is going forward, but there are some of them, I guess, more unique than others. That McConnell barn I walked through is an interesting one. I couldn't quite figure out what they did with some of those rooms up there, but maybe there's somebody out there that could enlighten me on that, but it was interesting. And the Peachin property, I have to agree, there's nothing there that I haven't seen in a lot of other properties in the past. So yeah, it's been interesting. Anyway, more comments from anyone else?
Are you opening up to the public or?
Sure, that'd be fine. Go right ahead. We're not, everybody's not tripping over themselves to the comments, so go right ahead.
Wow, that was a load. John, thank you very much. That was a lot of work, I could tell. I would love to get a copy of that report if you could send it to me. I might. Just wanting to know, you mentioned unique partnerships. Is there a way that the Historical Society could partner with the district and go for some type of grant or work with landmarks to try to get some funding to save something like the dairy barn out at Camp Algonquin?
I think if you know of any ways to help us financially or management of any of these, we would definitely want to hear from you and we could have that discussion. Yes.
I would agree with you, John. I agree.
You know,
But Kurt, I think the reality is we heard it's going to be tough to do. I don't know how much is out there.
Yeah, I know. I've kicked the tires on this kind of thing as well. And there is some money out there. There's even some federal grants out there. I've been trying to get a Sam's number though for several months. It's well, I'm sure Elizabeth could testify. Getting federal grants is an intriguing process. So yeah, I do appreciate that. So what is the quid pro quo for this stuff? If it's not on the list, are you saying that it's going to be torn down or ignored, or can you clarify that for me?
Yeah, I think ignored.
At this point in time, we probably don't have the money to, we're kind of in an odd position. We're not in the money to fix them. We're really not, we don't have the money to tear them down either. So that's kind of, we're behind on the list on some properties that we've wanted to take down buildings that there's nothing of value there and they're in poor condition. And they haven't been in this discussion for quite some time, but we haven't been able to take them down. And then we have these that we really don't have the money to fix either. So we're in quite a position where, okay, what do we do now at this point in time? And so we're looking for that answer is there where do we find money to do what needs to be done with these buildings? And if somebody has any ideas, we are open to those.
Just stop me if somebody else wants to get in here. I don't mean to dominate the conversation. John, when you evaluated, say, the roofs for these buildings, did you have a professional come in and do that, or was that staff that did that, or how did that work?
Yeah, Kurt, I'll answer that. Our professional staff.
Okay. Well, I'm just passing on something. So, you know, we have a lot of buildings, as you know, and we've got sort of a service agreement with Holland, and they will come in out of Crystal Lake, and they will come in and take a look at roofs for free and do up a really cool little report for you with recommended cost to fix and all of that stuff. So might be something you want to consider reaching out to them and having them come in and do that for some of those buildings. We found it valuable for our planning, and like you, we certainly can't bite off everything all at once. We sort of chip away at this stuff, but it does give you some good free professional advice. So, and then one last thing I wanted to ask you about, having seen government do this type of thing, is it possible that we could say do a bulk bid, sort of like townships do for sand and salt, for say tuck pointing, where we could maybe package one of our projects with the conservation district project and then maybe get a lower bid? Or is that just crazy thoughts?
I don't know anything about that, John.
I don't know anything about it.
Do you know if there'd be any savings that way? I don't know if they have to set up at different sites if there's any savings there or not, but I'm not an expert on that.
Well, yeah, typically they're the economy of scale. If you have 4 or 5, 6 projects, it generally is going to be less because the contractor knows that they can, they're going to be busy for a month, instead of just a day or two or 4 days here, 4 days there. So yeah, you do catch that economy of scale. I know that you see that in some bidding documents, but typically that goes with a government agency. For instance, the county will bid something, McHenry County will bid something, and they'll put a clause in there that basically says that if another government wants to jump in on this bid, they're able to jump in on this bid at that price. I've never seen that extended to a private not-for-profit, but it could, I'm not saying it can't happen. I just probably have to be some type of an agreement between us and them, an MOU or something.
One thing that's become real clear to me during this pandemic is that, partnerships are where it's at. Money is really tight. We're all going through this whole COVID lockdown stuff. I've seen, we have a situation here, and this is just hypothetical, okay? Where we have a limestone building that needs some tuck pointing work. Kennedy is not that far away. Maybe it's something that if somebody was coming out, they could bid both projects together. I don't know. It's not anything I've really explored, but I think the idea is intriguing and probably worth at least thinking about. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I would have a question regarding the Kennedy Way Station. Since that's very low on the list, is selling the building, has that ever occurred to the board? Is that a possibility? I'm not saying that I'm bidding or I know somebody who would, but if it was put out there, there may be somebody who is a real preservation nut who loves to do renovations and things of that nature. They may see it worthwhile even if they have to do a great deal of work.
So I can answer that. So under the Conservation District Act, once we acquire property, it is protected by the district, the land in perpetuity. So we can't sell or transfer. We could transfer to another unit of local government, which would be in the statute, or we would have to go through some big hoops through the governor's office and IDNR. So, and again, it was that statute is very strict purposely, right, to protect the areas once they are picked up and acquired. But we've got with the land, we do have these structures that are also on the land as well.
Okay.
Are you saying it's impossible in Elizabeth, or it's just near impossible?
Well, the land is protected. There are some unique ways to which that could be done if we were to carve it out, I guess. And there was good reason that it would transfer to another unit of government. That would be allowable. Obviously, though, we would need to board discussion, and then what unit of government, would take that? Would that be McHenry County as an example? And does that then fall under the Historic Preservation Commission, or however under the county's auspices? Or, but it can't go and be sold to a private from us.
Is Andrew Payne listening?
No.
No, he's not here tonight, but he could, if the board wanted, the determination on that, we could seek that from him, and then you could have that.
I mean, and I'm just talking off the top of my head, so I may well be wrong. You could hang on to the land and construct some type of lease agreement regarding the building, and that could be 100 years, or it could be whatever term you wished it to be, and it could be for a nominal sum, but basically you would transfer the responsibility of the building to a private party or corporation or whatever. So that's just an idea. Maybe it doesn't have any traction, but it would be a question to ask a knowledgeable real estate attorney.
And Trustee Cook, you are absolutely right. Leases and licenses are something that the district is allowed to do under our statute, and there are limitations based on the type of the length of that lease, but that is allowable.
Okay.
Well, if there's some way that if there's a building or something that we cannot take care of, or we deem that would, it's gonna fall in disrepair because we can't take care of all of them, and somebody else came forward and said they would like to, and they need some legal way of having control of it for a long period of time, that would certainly be to the benefit of everyone if something like that could be put together. I don't know how many opportunities are like that, but if there's one there, we definitely would, I would think we'd want to hear it at least, and have the discussion.
So leasing a building or facility under, just so I've got the act up here right now, under section 12, under the Conservation District Act. Specifically, it says to lease any building or facility constructed, reconstructed, altered, renewed, equipped, furnished, extended, developed, and maintained by the district to a responsible person, firm, or corporation for operation or development, or both, and maintenance for a period not longer than 20 years from the date of the lease.
So we could do 20-year increments is what.
20-year increments. For land, if we were doing a lease on land, you can do at a longer rate of 50 years, but it's restricted under building for 20.
Okay.
Well, if the Historical Society knows someone who might jump at that opportunity, I think we'd like to hear. We'd like to hear from them. I'm going to take a couple of minutes to talk about preservation of old unused buildings. Even though they have great historical significance and significant nostalgia, and they are literally irreplaceable, these post and beam constructed barns with stone foundations where the stones were, pulled off the fields and after they'd been deposited by the glacier. The question is, what are we going to do with these buildings for the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years? We have educational programs that are ongoing. We use the Prairie View Education Center. We have used the Weidrich Barn. We have facilities at Lost Valley, perhaps classrooms and so forth. The idea of preserving a formidable building like the T-Barn to take a class of students through it, grammar school, middle school, high school, even once a year during their education, to me seems like you are expending resources in a way that you might have a better use for those funds. All these buildings should be diagrammed, photographed. They might lend themselves to some type of virtual tour with all of the advances in digital technology. But the idea that the district, even on a 5-year rotating basis, is going to be able to fund buildings that basically remain empty the majority of the time. In other words, given winter and so forth, you're never going to heat these buildings or put enough light in them or have enough bathroom facilities and things like that to make them useful, 5 days a week, 10 months of the year. So I tend to be skeptical of the soundness of investing significant sums of money, even though I am in awe of some of these old farm buildings, and when you think they were constructed by hand, and you know, how the beams were put up and so forth and so forth. So I guess that's all I have to say at the moment. You know, you may think, I mean, we may look back at the wonderful agricultural history of McHenry County. It should be recognized and preserved, but there aren't a lot of future dairy farmers going to school in McHenry County today. So, you know, I think there's a limit in the interest that parents and you know, potentially taxpayers would have in spending money to preserve something that is no longer practically useful. Excuse me for being so blunt.
Can I respond to that?
Sure. Certainly.
Well, with all due respect, these buildings were on the property when the district acquired it. So it's not like they jumped in there. It's, you know, it's akin to somebody buying a house next to a pig farm and then complaining about the smell. You know, I think there is an obligation that the district has, and I understand the fiscal realities of the situation, but these were historic buildings and they were on the property from the get-go. Now, when you talk about the Pitchin Farm, I understand that a lot of those buildings were already in very poor condition, but you know, when you're talking about, you know, things like the Tribune Dormitory and the Kennedy Way Station, they have a historical place, and I think we would be doing everybody a disservice to just dismiss that because of you know, fiscal concerns.
Thank you, Kurt.
And I think even, you know, considering the fiscal concerns, there are ways to alleviate those. You know, the lease option, you know, having residential, you know, some of these are houses. I know there's some costs associated, but in the long run, what you'll be able to get in lease payments, you know, some of these buildings would be perfect for events. You know, to be able to generate some revenue, lease this to a company that would host these events out of these buildings. So I think that there's ways to do it. If there is going to be a decision to take things down, I would just urge that there be the documentation like was just mentioned, as well as hiring someone who will actually repurpose. There are people who actually take down and reconstruct barns in their entirety in new locations. So if something like that could be done, that would definitely be preferable.
In regards to the events, we have gone down that route a couple of times with the Tribune buildings and that, and we've seemed like we've come close a couple times to being able to get someone interested in renting those, managing them that way, but we haven't been able to finalize a deal. And then of course, when COVID hit, everybody's put a hold or a stop to any of those kind of discussions. So we have gone that route a few times, and maybe once the COVID-19 gets behind us, that opportunity might be there again. But for right now, that we haven't made the headway we need to in that regard.
Can I ask a question about the levy? So your levy's been reduced by the county board, is that correct?
No, it was, they would not approve it. They would not, there was so much pressure put that we couldn't move on.
Okay. I mean, isn't that effectively the same thing?
Mm.
Okay. All right. I'm following you. And then is there any possibility that this Senate bill could be revived, Elizabeth?
Anything's possible. I mean, the language is there. We had it all ready, and we would need to dust it off and see if the tenets on that is something that's still agreeable. We'd need to find a sponsor on the Senate and the House side. It was specific to the Conservation District Act. And so this was, this change, I believe, was specific to McHenry County. So the question would be, do we open it up for the other conservation districts as well? Is it something that they would avail themselves to? But some other entities do have. Park districts have the ability for a specific tax on historic preservation. Forest preserve districts have specific levies that they can get for specific uses for like their capital. So under the Conservation District Act, it is very limited. So we have our general fund. And I think to what Dave and what we've been communicating is we haven't been even able to take the funding for our general operations to care for the entire district, let alone an additional tax for this one. But legislation can be tried and attempted if the board was so willing to, pursue that. That could be explored.
Thank you.
Hey, I got a comment. I got two comments. This is Pat. I looked at the structure assessment report from 2015. Then on page 8 of that, there's a conclusion, and I don't think anything has changed since then. It just says that they spent X amount of dollars over 4 years that they got no use for, that we got no return off of. And the other comment I have is like some of these, which was somebody already said about I had a barn that somebody came and they tore it down, and they used the beams and the doors and the siding and all that, and I don't know if they built another barn, but they probably use it as in somebody's house or something. But I mean, there's money to be had, not besides just tearing them down and burning it up or burying it or whatever they do. So it's just a thought.
Thanks, Pat.
Well, I think that when we get going into this, it comes down to how much can we afford to do? We can't do everything, and I don't want to go down the road of fixing something part way. I see the one picture there at the McConnell Homestead, and I see people out there working in the yard and everything's cleared, and now I've walked it and everything they cleared is not clear any longer. It's grown back up. I don't want to waste people's time or money and then have it 5 and 10 years later have no plan for it, and then it goes back to the way it was. I think it's important to value people's time and resources in a way that we can continue to keep it up after they've made their effort and other people can follow through. So that's where I think we need a long-term plan as to what we can do and not do, so that any resource is not wasted. It's not that I'm for or against anything. It's more of what is practical and what can we get done and make it long-term and long-lasting versus throw something at it and then 10 years later it's in bad shape again and we're starting at ground zero once again. So all these structures have got some history. Families homesteaded them, built them, generations farmed them. A lot of McHenry County history is there, but not every one of them will we be able to maintain or keep up. But we can put a plan together to take care of as many as we can, and what fits into a plan going forward is what I'm really looking for. So
I haven't really no, that's great. I haven't really jumped in, and there's a lot of moving parts, so I don't even know kind of where the best place to focus. So I mean, one of the things we did with Fox Bluff, I'm getting all this right, as we had a demolition list, right? Those buildings that we knew we weren't going to be able to keep, they weren't in good shape, and we, as money became available, we were going down the line and getting those down. So I just think there's a lot of different things that we need to put in line, like you say, more of a master plan. So one of them is having that demolition list that we absolutely already know upfront, this isn't going to happen. We can't save this. It has maybe some historical value, maybe something, to Pat's point, maybe the wood itself might be of value to somebody who wants to use it somewhere else. Maybe there's some opportunities to get some of the demolition costs covered through what Pat was talking about. Then you have the liability issue. We've got buildings that can create liability. So we have to make sure that as those become liability issues, they get bumped to the top of the list. I think we were doing that, like I said, like that with Fox Bluff. I understand, like, to Bill's point, it gets kind of difficult. I mean, if you've got something and it's like McConnell Farm, and how often are you using it, and are you getting enough out of it over the course of the year to warrant the money? I think it is difficult to know. And I think that the challenge there is that it's hard to know what that vision should be or what it will look like down the line, maybe 50 years from now. Right now, there's so many, we still have a very rural feel to our county, but that developmental pressure, I know it kind of waned when the economic downturn came, but that's going to come back. I was listening to the Chicago Region Tree Initiative had a seminar last week, and they talked about all the city centers in the country are where the pressure for growth are going to come. You're not going to get a new city center in the middle of the heartland, you know, in the middle of the country somewhere. It's going to expand out from Chicago. So that pressure for development is going to be there. And maybe 50 years from now, having not just buildings that you take a child to during their school day, but maybe a living, working farm that represents the turn of the century, that maybe somebody's actually operating, and it's not just for school groups. You come in there and that's a year-round kind of destination that now feeds into, I think there was a letter that came over from Mrs. LaPat or something like, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing her name right, but it's part of the National Hackmatack National Wildlife Refuge. And, you know, in terms of being a destination, and you see some of the museums they have at Lake County Forest Preserve, it becomes a place for people to go. And if it's part of this bigger refuge, maybe there are some partnerships that we can be tapping into. So if we are doing something that's going to benefit schools, maybe the school and districts, and maybe the county and the Historical Society, and maybe we talk to the Economic Development Corporation about a larger, where's that vision? Where can we be going down the line where we're all supporting it? Because the district can't do it by itself anyway. Partnerships are important now. I had one more thing. Oh, the other thing I was thinking about, maybe having our foundation reach out to the Tribune. That's their build. I mean, that they were part of that movement. They helped support that back in 1907. What about reaching out to them to help maybe fund a building that is in their namesake? Same thing with the Board of Trade. Maybe there's some way of tapping into that the foundation can be using that as a fundraising opportunity.
It's a great idea, Lynn. That's a great idea.
Dollars there.
Elizabeth, did you say they've been contacted once before?
Yes, they did on multiple times, because obviously we've got a landscape architect that did a plan. We've got some namesakes. It has a lot of history there. And even the work that we were doing with a third party was also pounding the pavement to look for fundings to help chip in to assist us. So yes, that has been looked. But again, you have to get the right players and everything has to align. But no, great ideas to be looking.
I interrupted Lynn, so she should keep going.
Oh, no, that's okay. No, and that's, I had forgotten about that, because I think that came up during our discussions before, but maybe now with, the foundation, maybe, who knows, maybe there's an opportunity there. So I don't, and then I would go back look into the legislative, going back and seeing what can be done to expand our opportunities with funding and separate levy options that might be available. If we had support then, we may be able to garner that support again.
Anyone else?
Well, I'll make a comment, John, if no one else.
Go ahead, Bill. It's open to anyone.
All right. Well, we serve at the on behalf of the community, and it's not just our individual points of view. I would suggest, though, that before we go to the legislature to ask for more taxing authority, that we do something to take the pulse of the taxpayer in McHenry County. the Conservation District has a very good image with the taxpayer, as evidenced by the survey that we conducted earlier in the year and the results and so forth. But I think we have to be very careful about the tax issue. And so I would suggest personally that before you try to add to the taxing authority, you get some type of feedback from the community at large. Is this something that they would be happy to see on their tax bill? Thank you.
And if I may speak just to something Trustee Campbell had said, living history farms is a very viable alternative. We have none in McHenry County, but there are numbers of them in Illinois, and three prominent ones come to mind. One is Klein Creek Farm, and they are in West Chicago. And we would think of West Chicago. I mean, that's we're far more rural than West Chicago is. There is the Wagner Farm, and that is in Glenview, again, which is a place that's far more acidified than us. And the last one I was going to bring up was the Volkening Farm, and that's in Schaumburg. Now, there are far more than that, but all of those, they are very well-respected farms. They're part of the museum community. They have programming going on throughout the year. It's not 365 days a year. Of course, it's when in season, but you know, they would have Christmas programming, and they definitely have in the fall and the spring and the summer where they are open, and they do get visitors. So that is a possibility. That's an alternative. I mean, McConnell Farm might be something that might be very viable for that.
Do you know what I have a question. Do you know what the long-term plan for the Peterson Farm is? That by McHenry, I know that they're doing some work there, but I don't know what's the long-term plan for that.
That I do not know. That's the city of McHenry, and they have events. They have some events. But
yeah, I know they do that.
They're not a living history farm. All these other places, they are operational farms.
Yeah, and I didn't know if that was a long-range plan for that farm or if I think that's something else we need to check into is there other groups that are trying to accomplish the same thing and see how we can pool resources or work on something like that.
Because one of the things I'm thinking about with that, I'm sorry, Elizabeth, okay. The only reason I'm thinking about that is because we came out here a long time ago and it was very rural. And Dave, you've mentioned a few of the barns that you had a chance to walk through. I wish I had. We had so many beautiful farms around us, and that's why, in large part, we came out. My husband and I, which was 10 years after my family had moved out this way. And I can understand why, Grace, and thank you for mentioning those, the living farms in Glenview, Schaumburg, and West Chicago would be so popular is because over time, as that ruralness and as the development comes and you lose that rural setting, people want to be able to get to the farm. They want to be able to experience that. For the people, you know, when you're further into the city, you have to go farther and farther away. There's been a lot of development down here in the southeast corner of this county, and it has very much become very much like any suburb as you go east. The benefit is we can still go west or north and in about 15 minutes be in a very open area. But that ability to do that, there's going to be tremendous pressure for that and on that over time. And I think we will see it become much more congested and much more developed, and having access to something like that, I think people will really value. I understand we don't have the money to do that. We can't commit to that right this second, but long-term vision, even probably, you know, long-term vision, I can see the value of that being for our residents here in this county. So. Elizabeth, you had something. I'm sorry. You were gonna.
No, that's okay. I was going to say that the properties that were mentioned, and I have to go back and do some research, but I would gather between the Wagner Farm in Glenview, by the Glenview Park District, the Schaumburg Park District in West Chicago, that to see if they've in fact have a separate levy for those historical properties. I know in Skokie we did for our historic fire engine house that we did specifically. I look at the survey and Trustee Cook, I appreciate you taking a look at that. You know, obviously our esteem ratings are very well received. We're a very trusted unit of local government. When we looked at priorities, if you recall, when we made the presentation to the documentation of the items that were asked, the top 3 priorities did not relate though to providing historically or culturally important areas. It was maintaining existing conservation areas, trails, and facilities. Again, did they group facilities in there? I don't know. I'm assuming those are the built environments for access. Second was preserving, restoring wildlife habitat. And third was protecting, restoring natural wetlands and woodlands. And then as you went through all the activities to which they were listed, historical, cultural important sites were at the bottom of our listings. And so again, percentage-wise, it's just in reference, point in time, that was done pre-COVID. But that's our survey results. And that was a statistically accurate survey of our constituents.
Anyone else? More discussion? All right, if there's no more discussion, I encourage everybody that as they have any thoughts to questions, that they contact the district through John or Elizabeth or myself or any other trustee to give us any thoughts, and we can continue to put those together as we try to budget and put a plan together for this. Tonight was really just a discussion to bring out as much information as possible as we continue to go forward. And I really appreciate everybody's concerns, their thoughts, anything with an idea that can help move us forward. So if there's no more comments by anyone, I will take a motion to adjourn then at that point in time, or at this point in time.
I'll move.
Dave makes the motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, thank you, Linda.
Yep.
I will ask for a roll call vote then for adjournment.
Trustee Thomas,
Yes.
Trustee Fritz,
Yes.
Trustee Dom,
Yes.
Trustee Campbell,
Yes.
Trustee Cook,
Yes.
Trustee Brandt,
Yes.
and Trustee Hunning.
Yes. Thank you, everyone, and have a Merry
Hey, John,
Christmas.
can I just make a public apology to Megan? I freaked out today because I couldn't find a document. So I sent her an email, I called her, and there it was. So sorry, Megan.
You're totally fine. Glad I can help you.
All right, well,
Merry Christmas, everybody.
Merry Christmas to everyone.
Christmas.
Thank you.
And
Merry Christmas.
everyone.
Christmas.
Talk to everyone soon. Okay, good evening.
Bye.